Hello, Canada. Alex Monahan here, Foundations Prodigy, ineligible. It's been about 8 months since my last video, and I do apologize about that. As I'm sure you can see, I've moved, and my rental situation isn't so great. However, I also got a new mic, and I hope it's going to work and offer some better audio than I've had in the past. But I'm making today's video because I was unhappy with the quality of work that Prime Minister Madame de Deficit had done on the 150th birthday. And I was just kind of working on writing my own little speech. It's maybe not the best, but at least it's an account of kind of what we've been doing for the last 150 years. So, without further ado, I will begin. Welcome to our 150th Jubilation of Confederation. My cherished countrymen, happy Canada Day. Thank you for coming, and for those of you who are watching at home, thank you as well. I couldn't be more impressed by any other group of people. We have accomplished so much together. Let's recant how we have defined what it means to be Canadian. 100,000 years ago, at the beginning of the Ice Age, our indigenous peoples migrated here to their ancestral territories over a large bridge clearly made of ice. Where they lived happily until maybe I'm not sure if this date is right, but 1000 AD, when Leif Erikson and company landed at Land's Ask Meadows in Newfoundland. Excuse me. Which set the tone of the ages to come, ones that could not be stopped or comprehended. After Leif and company left for home, they spread tales of grandeur and intrigue across the Isles, the Falklands, and the Baltics of this fresh, newfound land. As we all know, the French were the next set of brave souls to set out for this newfound land. When the French landed on Newfoundland, the fur trade and fishing industries kicked off in the early 16th century. The first permanent settlement of Quebec City was founded in 1620 with those 60 brave and historical colonists, and by the 17th century, the fur trade was in full tilt. And Portuguese, Spanish, French, and English Basque whalers established the first industrial station in the New World at the Red Bay in Labrador around 1750 to 1850. That area is now a UNESCO heritage site. Quebec and Ontario, teeming with possibility and just waiting, were teeming with possibility and just waiting to burst into the majesty of sovereignty. In that very year, whatever the year was, two men named John A. Macdonald, leader of the Canada West Conservative Party, Ontario, and George Brown, leader of the Clear Grits Party, would start the birth of Confederation when showing interest of the lukewarm resolutions made by Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Prince Edward Island, but never acted on. And by 1867, Confederation was finalized by Queen Victoria, and as part of the agreements, the provinces of Ontario and Quebec were born. Confederation was never an easy task. There was opposition, and it took the support of the four biggest parties, and those who did not agree were forced to accept the changes. With minority rules to this day. After the birth of a new government, Sir John A. Macdonald was appointed Prime Minister from 1867 to 1872. We started to quickly grow our territory, and in 1870, Manitoba and the Northwest Territories were established. British Columbia was brought into Confederation. In 1871, with the start and completion of the Canadian Pacific Railroad in 1881 to 1885, Prince Edward Island joined Confederation. In 1873, Alexander Mackenzie was voted as the second Prime Minister in 1873 to 1878. Then Sir John A. Macdonald was the third Prime Minister again, from 1879 to 1891. The fourth Prime Minister was Sir John Abbott, from 1891 to 1892. Ooh, excuse me. Gotta find the right page. The fifth Prime Minister was Sir Mackenzie Bomwell, from 1894 to 1896. The sixth Prime Minister was Sir Charles Turner, from 1896 to 1896. The seventh Prime Minister was Sir Wilfrid Laurier, 1896 to 1911. The Yukon Territory joined Canada in 1898. Alberta and Saskatchewan joined in 1905. Sir Robert Borden was appointed as the eighth Prime Minister in 1911 to 1920. "74 years after Confederation, before our first centennial, World War I started in 1914. The war ended in 1918, and 61,000 Canadian lives were lost. The ninth Prime Minister, Arthur McGuine, not quite sure how to pronounce his last name, was elected in 1920 to 1921. The 10th Prime Minister was none other than William Lowen Mackenzie King, from 1921 to 1926. The 11th Prime Minister was Arthur Magani again, from 1926 to 1926. The 12th Prime Minister was Mackenzie King, from 1926 to 1930, and the 13th Prime Minister was R.B. Bennett, from 1930 to 1935. The 14th PM was Prime Minister King again, from 1935 to 1948. World War II broke out in 1939 and ended in 1945. At that time, more than 1 million men and women served full-time in the Canadian Armed Forces, and over 43,000 in estimation were killed. It is also believed that at least 20,000 of our fallen soldiers are still missing in action. Newfoundland finally joined Canada in 1949 due to the British interest in the grand cod fishery of the universe. The 15th Prime Minister was Louis St. Laurent from 1948 to 1957. We were one of the founding members of the United Nations in 1945. We were also a part of NATO's conception in 1949. The 16th Prime Minister, John Diefenbaker, from 1957 to 1963. The 17th PM was Lester B. Pearson from 1963 to 1968. After the turmoil of the First and Second World Wars, we adopted the symbol that tells us who we are, the pride and joy of our identity, the maple leaf flag, in 1965. And the 18th Prime Minister was Pierre Trudeau from 1968 to 1978. The 19th Prime Minister was Joe Clark from 1979 to 1980. The 20th Prime Minister was, again, Pierre Trudeau from 1980 to 1984. The 21st Prime Minister was John Turner from 1984 to 1984. The 22nd Prime Minister was Brian Mulroney, 1984 to 1993. The 23rd Prime Minister was Kim Campbell from 1993 to 1993. The 24th Prime Minister was John Chrétien from 1993 to 2003. Lastly, carved out of the Northwest Territories, Nunavut was born in 1999. I myself was only 9 years old at this time. In 1947, Premier Tommy Douglas and the government of Saskatchewan started a provincial-wide universal hospital plan. Alberta and British Columbia followed suit by 1950. In 1957, the Canadian government passed Hospital Insurance and Diagnostic Services Act, and in 1966 passed the Medical Care Act, and lastly in 1984 the federal government passed the Canada Health Act. The Charter of Rights and Freedoms was first passed in 1867 and updated in 1982. We signed our first trade deal with America called the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA. It has been quite the journey, but there are much more for us to talk about, like the cool stuff that we have been responsible for, like insulin, Superman, basketball, standard time, canola, AM radio, poutine, and enamel bars, walkie-talkies, prosthetic hands, foghorns, sonar, hockey masks, IMAX, instant replay, lacrosse, the electronic microscope, the cardiac pacemaker, garbage bags, alkaline batteries, plexiglass, key-formed animation, JavaScript, telephones, Blackberries, and of course, celebrity astronaut Commander Chris Hadfield. And that's just to name a few. Along this journey, we didn't get everything right, and here is a list of what I think are our biggest failures. The Admiral Arrow, Canadian cinema, being unable to diversify our economy, University of McGill's sensory deprivation and torture research, the gun registry, and our two biggest failures are certainly the or the creation of residential schools, and the mistreatment of our First Nations population. The second worst thing we have done is the 60s scoop, to repeat the actions of tearing First Nations families apart. Within my honest opinion, is a larger travesty than the first, due to our inability to learn from our first mistakes. Thank you for your presence and time, and happy Canada Day, and happy 150. Please don't forget the words of a wise man. We are all in this together. Now, I hope you enjoyed that. There was a few things that I think I forgot to write into this version, because this is like my third time running it. I had dates for the Supreme Court when it had been established, as well as a few, I think at least one other thing, because I might have mentioned the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in this one. But other than that, thank you for listening, and stay frosty.